Welcome to Pillow Tales, where every story is a soft escape into peaceful dreams. My name is Brian, and I want to thank you for being here. Find a cozy spot, wrap yourself in comfort, and let the soothing sounds and gentle words guide you into a night of sweet, peaceful dreams. The clock on the wall ticked softly, each second passing with a gentle click that filled the quiet room. It was nearly midnight, and the house was wrapped in a peaceful stillness. Outside, the night was calm, with only the faint rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the sleeping world. You sat in a comfortable chair by the window, wrapped in a warm blanket. A cup of tea sat beside you, its steam curling into the cool night air. The soft warmth of the tea, combined with the peaceful silence of the house, created a perfect atmosphere for relaxation. Your eyes felt heavy, your mind drifting, but just as you were about to close your eyes, something outside caught your attention. Beyond the fence at the edge of your yard, there was a faint light. It was dim, barely noticeable, but it flickered like a candle in the distance. You blinked, thinking perhaps you had imagined it, but the light was still there, a soft glow in the dark. Curious, you stood up and moved closer to the window. The light seemed to be coming from the garden at the far end of the property, an overgrown place you rarely visited. It had been there since you moved in, tangled with ivy and long grass, hidden from view by the tall hedges that surrounded it. You hadn't given it much thought before, but now, in the stillness of the night, it seemed to beckon you. Without really thinking, you slipped on your shoes, wrapped your blanket around your shoulders like a cloak, and quietly stepped out into the night. The air was cool and crisp, the scent of dew and fresh grass filling your lungs as you made your way toward the light. As you approached the garden, the light grew brighter, and soon you could make out its source, a lantern, hanging from an old iron hook at the entrance of the garden. The lantern swayed gently in the breeze, casting long shadows across the ground. Its warm glow illuminated the path ahead, leading into the heart of the garden, where the trees stood tall and dark, their branches twisting together like ancient, sleeping creatures. You hesitated at the entrance, wondering if you should turn back. But there was something about the garden, something inviting, almost magical. The light from the lantern seemed to draw you in, promising mystery and discovery. So, with a deep breath, you stepped forward. The path was narrow, lined with wildflowers and vines that brushed against your legs as you walked. The deeper you went into the garden, the more overgrown it became, with bushes and trees growing in tangled clusters. The air here was different, thicker, quieter, as if the rest of the world had faded away, leaving only the garden and its secrets. At the center of the garden, you found something unexpected. A stone bench, worn and weathered, sitting beneath a large oak tree. The tree's branches stretched wide, creating a canopy that blocked out most of the moonlight, but the lantern's glow still illuminated the space. Sitting on the bench was a man. He was dressed simply, in clothes that looked like they belonged to another time. His head was bowed, his hands resting on his knees, and he seemed lost in thought. For a moment, you wondered if you should speak or if you had intruded on something private. But before you could decide, he lifted his head and looked at you. His eyes were kind, though tired, and his face held a gentle, almost knowing smile. "You came," he said softly, as though he had been expecting you. "I saw the light," you replied, unsure of what else to say. "I was curious." The man nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "It always starts with curiosity," he said, "but there's more here than just the light. This garden, it has stories to tell." You glanced around the garden, your eyes following the twisting paths and the shadowed corners. There was something about this place that felt alive, as though it held more than just plants and trees. It felt like a place where time moved differently, where secrets lingered in the air, waiting to be discovered. "What kind of stories?" you asked. The man smiled again, a sad smile this time. "Stories of the past, stories that were forgotten, buried under time and memories." He paused, looking down at his hands for a moment before continuing. "This garden, it's been here for centuries. Many have passed through, and many have left their mark. Some came searching for answers, others for peace. But the garden only reveals what you're ready to hear." You frowned, unsure of what he meant. "How do I know what I'm ready to hear?" The man stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. He motioned for you to sit on the bench where he had been sitting. "Take a seat," he said softly. "The garden will show you." Hesitant but intrigued, you sat down on the bench. The stone was cool beneath you, but not uncomfortable. The moment you settled in, the air around you seemed to shift. The night grew quieter, the sounds of the breeze and the rustling leaves fading into the background until there was only silence. For a moment, nothing happened. You simply sat there, staring at the garden, waiting. But then, slowly, the garden began to change. It was subtle at first, just a soft flicker of light in the distance. But then the light grew, spreading through the trees and bushes, until the entire garden was bathed in a soft, golden glow. And with the light came voices, soft whispers that seemed to drift on the air, growing louder as they circled around you. You couldn't make out what they were saying, but the voices felt familiar, like echoes of conversations you had heard long ago. They spoke of love, loss, hope, and regret, stories of people who had walked the same path you were now on, people who had come to the garden in search of something. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and as they did, images began to form in the air around you. They were faint at first, like shadows, but then they grew clearer, sharper, until you could see them as clearly as if they were standing right in front of you. The first image was of a young woman, standing at the entrance of the garden, much like you had done earlier. She was dressed in a flowing gown, her hair pinned up, her face pale in the moonlight. She looked anxious, glancing around as if searching for something or someone. Suddenly, a man appeared, stepping out from the shadows. His face was obscured, but the woman recognized him immediately. She ran to him, her arms outstretched, her expression one of relief and joy. But as she reached him, something changed. The joy on her face turned to confusion, then fear, as the man pulled away from her, stepping back into the shadows. She called out to him, but he didn't respond. He simply vanished, leaving her standing alone in the garden, her hands clutching the empty air where he had once been. The image faded, and another took its place. This time, it was an older man sitting on the same bench where you now sat. His head was bowed, his shoulders slumped, and in his hands he held a small book. He opened the book and began to read, his lips moving silently as he mouthed the words. But as he read, tears began to fall from his eyes, dripping onto the pages of the book. His shoulders shook with silent sobs, and though you couldn't hear what he was reading, you could feel the weight of his sorrow, heavy and suffocating. The garden showed you more images of people who had come before, each with their own story, their own reason for seeking out the strange, hidden place. Some came in search of answers, others seeking solace. But in the end, they all left the same way, alone, with their questions unanswered, their hearts heavy with the weight of what they had lost. As the last image faded, the garden grew quiet once more. The light dimmed, and the whispers fell silent, leaving you sitting in the stillness, your mind buzzing with the stories you had just witnessed. The man returned, stepping out of the shadows as if he had been there all along. His expression was calm, but there was a sadness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "You understand now," he said softly. "This garden holds the stories of those who have passed through it, but it does not give answers. It only shows what has been." You looked up at him, your heart heavy with the weight of what you had seen. "What happened to them? The people in the garden?" The man sighed, sitting down beside you. "They were lost just like you. They came here looking for something: closure, peace, understanding. But the garden can't give them that. It can only show them the past, the choices they made, the paths they walked." You frowned. "So, there's no way to find what they were looking for?" The man shook his head. "No, the garden shows what was, but it cannot change what is. The answers they sought were always within them, but sometimes it takes seeing the past to understand the present." You sat in silence for a moment, letting his words sink in. The garden had shown you the stories of others, but it hadn't given you any answers, any closure. Yet, somehow, you felt a strange sense of peace. Maybe it was the garden's way of telling you that not all mysteries had to be solved. Some things were meant to remain a part of the past, to be accepted rather than understood. The man stood up, offering you a hand. "It's time to go," he said gently. "The garden has shown you all it can." You took his hand, letting him help you to your feet. As you turned to leave, you glanced back at the garden one last time. The lantern still hung from its hook, its light flickering softly in the breeze. The garden was quiet once more, its secrets hidden beneath the shadows of the trees. As you walked back toward the house, the man disappeared, fading into the night like a dream you had just awoken from. The air around you was cool and fresh, and though the garden still lingered in your mind, you felt lighter, as though a weight you hadn't realized you were carrying had been lifted. Back inside, you settled into your chair once more, the warmth of the fire wrapping around you like a comforting embrace. The clock ticked softly on the wall, its steady rhythm matching the beat of your heart. Outside, the night was still and quiet, the garden hidden in the shadows beyond the window. You closed your eyes, letting the peace of the night wash over you. The garden's mysteries would stay with you, but for now you were content to rest, to let the stillness of the night lull you into sleep. As the story ends, let the calm of the night and the soothing rhythm of the rain carry you into a peaceful, restful sleep. Until next time, sweet dreams.